Welcome back, guys. Today we have a very exciting video for you. I want you to think back for a second and tell me what's the first Batman suit you remember actually seeing. Maybe it was some cartoon rerun on a lazy Saturday morning, a movie poster you stared at way too long, or a bootleg action figure your parents somehow grabbed that had Batman rocking bright red and green instead of black and gray. Yes, I had that one. I've watched this guy go from purple gloves shadows to rubber, muscle armor, tactical military gear, and full-on power suits built to punch gods in the face. Comics, games, shows, movies, you name it. And here's the wild part. If you start counting every timeline and adaptation, you're looking at over 200 different Batsuits. But I'm not doing all of that today. I'm keeping this one personal. These are our 30 favorite Batman suits, the ones that stuck with us long after we closed the comic, switched off the console, or walked out of the theater. So, let's see how many of these match your list, and how many make you rethink your own number one pick. Let's get into it. The original 1939 Detective Comics suit. Okay, so before we get into 30 different suits, we have to talk about the one that started this whole mess, and honestly, this suit almost didn't happen the way we know it. Bob Kane's very first pitch for Batman was a dude in bright red tights with two stiff wings strapped to his arms, no gloves, and a tiny domino mask like Green Lantern's. I know, it doesn't sound very Batman, does it? It was Bill Finger, the co-creator, who spent decades not getting proper credit, who looked at that sketch and said, "Nope, we need a cowl, we need a cape, and for God's sake, make it dark." And that's basically how we got the version that showed up in Detective Comics issue 27 back in 1939. That suit had a black cowl with pointy ears, a gray bodysuit, and a cape that looked less like fabric and more like actual bat wings. It was all stiff and angular, nothing like the flowing capes we see today. Oh, and his gloves were purple, not black, purple. There was also no yellow oval around the bat symbol yet. That's a much later addition we'll get to. The chest was just a plain black bat silhouette, almost swallowed up by how dark the rest of the suit already was. It looked unfinished in some ways, almost like a Halloween costume compared to what came after. But that's exactly the point. Every single suit on this list, whether it's a movie, a game, or a cartoon, is reacting to this original sketch in some way. Add armor, remove the purple, extend the ears, whatever direction designers took, they were always working against this 1939 blueprint. It's not the flashiest suit here by a long shot, but without it, none of the other 29 exist. Batman, the animated series classic suit. If you ask a whole generation of fans to close their eyes and picture Batman, there's a solid chance they're not picturing a comic panel or a movie still, they're picturing this suit. Batman, the animated series hit in 1992, and Bruce Timm, along with Eric Radomski, basically reinvented what a Batman cartoon could look like. They called their whole visual approach Dark Deco. This mashup of old Fleischer Superman cartoons from the 40s and the moody gothic vibe Tim Burton had just brought to the big screen. And the suit itself is deceptively simple when you actually break it down. Gray body, black cape, black cowl, black gloves, and boots with just a hint of blue catching the light on the cape's underside, and that yellow oval sitting around the bat symbol on the chest. No visible muscles, no armor plating, nothing mechanical bolted onto it anywhere. It's basically the most stripped down suit on this entire list. So why does it work so well? Honestly, it's less about the suit itself and more about how it moves. When Batman stands still, that cape wraps around his whole body so he becomes this looming black triangle. And the second he leaps into motion, it snaps and billows behind him like it has a mind of its own. Add Kevin Conroy's voice into the mix and you get a version of Batman that felt more definitive than the comics he was based on. This design ended up shaping the Kevin Conroy era of DC animation for 2 more decades, and honestly, you can trace a straight line from this cartoon suit to how later Arkham games and even Nolan's films approached the character's presence. Not bad for a suit with 0 gadgets built into it. Batman 89 Tim Burton suit. Watch Tim Burton's Batman today, and the first thing that hits you is how little this suit resembles anything from the comics at the time. No gray spandex, no blue trunks, nothing remotely colorful. Tim Burton wanted his Batman to look like a walking nightmare, not a guy in pajamas, and costume designer Bob Ringwood delivered exactly that. The entire suit was molded foam latex over a neoprene bodysuit, all black except for that acrylic yellow chest emblem and the brass utility belt, and it basically sculpted an artificial bodybuilder physique onto Michael Keaton, who by his own admission was not exactly bulky in real life. Here's the thing though, the suit came with a massive real-world problem. The rubber cowl was so rigid that Keaton physically could not turn his head. Not even a little. If you watch closely, you'll notice he twists his entire torso every time he needs to look sideways, because turning just the neck would have torn the seams. Ringwood apparently went through 28 different batsuit designs, 25 capes, and 6 cowls before landing on this final look, which honestly explains why it feels so deliberate despite the limitations. And here's why this suit matters so much. Every single live-action Batman after this one, Val Kilmer, George Clooney, even Christian Bale's first outing, wore some variation of this exact rubber muscle suit template. It took almost 2 decades and a total rethink in The Dark Knight before anyone dared to break away from what Ringwood built here. That's a pretty wild legacy for a costume that couldn't even let its own actor look over his shoulder. The classic Bronze Age blue and gray comic suit. Technically speaking, this suit's story starts a little earlier than the Bronze Age itself. Back in 1964, DC editor Julius Schwartz took over Batman titles that were, let's be honest, kind of struggling, and he brought in artist Carmine Infantino to give the character what they literally called a new look. Infantino's biggest change appeared in Detective Comics number 327, and it was deceptively small. He just added a bright yellow oval around the existing black bat symbol on the chest. Some people say it was purely a design choice to make the logo pop against all that dark blue and gray. Others insist DC wanted something they could actually trademark, since you can't really copyright a plain black bat shape as easily. Either way, that yellow oval combined with the blue cowl, blue cape, and blue gloves over a gray bodysuit became the Batman look for over 3 decades. It carried through the campy Adam West show in 1966, dominated the Bronze Age comics of the 70s with artists like Neil Adams drawing some genuinely gorgeous, moody stuff in this exact costume, and stuck around well into the 80s and 90s. This is the suit that ended up on lunchboxes, Super Friends cartoons, action figures, pretty much everywhere. So when someone who doesn't even follow comics closely tries to draw Batman from memory, 9 times out of 10 they're drawing some version of this blue and gray look, not the black and gray original, and definitely not whatever the current comics run has going on. It only really got phased out after storylines like Nightfall and No Man's Land pushed the character into darker territory in the late 90s, but by then this suit had already cemented itself as the default mental image of Batman for basically the whole world.
My friends and I were working for the local government. They were trying to buy the loyalty. We're being raided in a forest.
Batman Begins suit, Nolan. After sitting through Batman and Robin, audiences in 2005 were kind of desperate for a Batman who looked like he could actually survive a fight, not just pose in one. Christopher Nolan and costume designer Lindy Hemming leaned hard into that idea, and the story they built around the suit is honestly one of the more clever pieces of writing in the whole franchise. Instead of Bruce Wayne just having a suit lying around, the film has him discover a mothballed military prototype inside Wayne Enterprises' Applied Sciences Division, with Lucius Fox basically becoming his tech guy. In universe, the base layer is a Nomex survival suit meant for advanced infantry, reinforced with a Kevlar biweave for armor, and the cape is made of this fictional memory cloth that turns rigid when an electric current runs through it, letting Batman glide short distances. It's a genuinely clever way to explain why a billionaire vigilante suddenly has bulletproof, fireproof gear instead of just, a costume. That said, this suit still carried over one very old problem. Christian Bale couldn't turn his head in it either. The exact same issue that plagued Keaton, Kilmer, and Clooney before him. Nolan and Hemming actually leaned into this a little, using it to make Batman feel stiffer and more machine-like compared to Bruce Wayne underneath. What really matters here, though, is the shift in philosophy. This suit moved away from the shiny rubber muscle look that had defined Batman movies since 1989, and pushed towards something that felt like actual tactical gear you might find in a defense catalog. That grounded functional approach became the blueprint for basically every serious live-action take on Batman that came after. Jean-Paul Vallée's Azrael Batsuit. Okay, so if suit number 1 on this list was the blueprint, this one is basically the blueprint getting completely broken. After Bane snapped Bruce Wayne's back during Nightfall, Bruce made the call to hand the cowl over to Jean-Paul Vallée, a guy trained from childhood by a secretive religious order called Saint Dumas, to be basically a killing machine. That backstory matters a lot here because Jean-Paul didn't just wear Batman's old suit, he eventually scrapped it entirely and built something that reflected who he actually was underneath. This suit, which debuted in Batman issue 500 back in 1993, ditched the cape and cowl altogether in favor of armored, bladed wings. We're talking a built-in flamethrower, a shuriken launcher fed by a circular ammo pack on the back that shot bat-shaped throwing blades, and armor plating rated to survive machine gun fire and grenade blasts. It even had an underwater rebreather. Basically, every restraint Bruce Wayne ever put on himself, Jean-Paul threw straight out the window. And look, from a pure spectacle standpoint, this suit goes hard. There's a reason cosplayers still recreate it decades later. But narratively, it's meant to unsettle you. Every spike and blade on this costume is a visual cue that the man wearing it has completely lost the plot. And sure enough, as the Nightfall saga rolled into Nightquest and then Night's End, Jean-Paul got more paranoid and more violent until Bruce had no choice but to physically take the mantle back from him. That's honestly why this suit stays so divisive among fans. Some people think it's a peak 90s creation, others think it's everything wrong with comics in that decade crammed into one costume. Either way, no suit on this list works quite this hard to make you distrust the person wearing it. Post-Nightfall Bruce Wayne suit, Troika. This one has a genuinely messy origin story, and honestly, that's what makes it interesting. After Jean-Paul Vallée lost control and Bruce finally reclaimed the Batman mantle in the Night's End storyline, DC wanted a big visual moment to signal that the real Batman was back for good. So in 1995's Troika arc, artist Vince Giordano designed a brand new suit for Bruce, a gray one-piece bodysuit with the blue restricted to just the mask and cape, plus these odd built-in spines running along the gloves and boots. Problem was, basically none of the other artists drawing Batman at the time liked it. It looked awkward, the proportions were weird, and barely 3/4 of the way through its own debut storyline, the whole thing got quietly written out with an in-story excuse that it didn't offer Bruce enough protection. What actually stuck, and what people usually mean when they picture this era of Batman, is the suit that replaced it almost immediately after. Artist Kelly Jones, who was drawing the main Batman title at the time, settled the character into an all-black and coal gray Kevlar suit, no trunks, spiked gloves and boots, and a much darker cowl and cape that honestly looked closer to Michael Keaton's movie costume than anything from the comics before it. This became the Bruce Wayne look for years, carrying through Jones's celebrated run and well into the No Man's Land era later in the decade. It's a suit that's easy to overlook because it doesn't have one flashy debut moment attached to it. It kind of snuck in after a failed experiment. But if you grew up reading Batman comics in the mid to late 90s, this exact silhouette is probably what you picture when someone says Bruce Wayne is back in the cowl. The Dark Knight Rises suit. By the time Christopher Nolan started prepping the sequel to Batman Begins, there was one complaint costume designer Lindy Hemming absolutely had to fix. Christian Bale, like every live-action Batman before him, could not turn his head in the suit. So for The Dark Knight, Hemming basically tore the whole design apart and rebuilt it from scratch, cutting the cowl loose from the body so it worked more like a motorcycle helmet than a solid rubber mask glued onto the shoulders. Suddenly, Bale could actually look left and right without twisting his whole torso, which sounds like a small thing until you realize it had been a problem in literally every Batman movie since 1989. The new suit was built from around 110 individual pieces of polyester mesh, urethane, and carbon fiber panels instead of one heavy rubber shell, which made it lighter and way more flexible for the extended fight choreography this movie needed. Hemming pulled inspiration from motocross gear and actual military armor, wanting something that read as a modern suit of armor rather than a costume. The gauntlet blades also got an upgrade here, becoming retractable and even deployable as thrown weapons. And here's a fun detail. When Nolan came back for The Dark Knight Rises, Hemming actually kept this exact suit largely unchanged. She just built out 10 different capes in varying lengths, including one that could snap into a rigid glider shape for the big rooftop scenes. So really, this entry covers 2 movies but basically one suit. It's the version most people picture when they think Nolan trilogy Batman, and is the one that finally proved a live-action Batsuit could look tough without turning its own actor into a mannequin. The Batman 2022 Tactical Suit. Quick myth to clear up before anything else because it got repeated online for 2 straight years. When Robert Pattinson's suit first leaked, half the internet decided the metal bat symbol on his chest had to be forged from the actual gun that killed Thomas and Martha Wayne, kind of echoing a story from Detective Comics issue 1000. It's a great theory. Director Matt Reeves shot it down directly, confirming the emblem is actually a functional tactical knife built into the suit, not a repurposed murder weapon. Once you get past that, though, the real story behind this costume is arguably even more interesting. Reeves wanted a Batman who was only in his 2nd year on the job, someone without Wayne Enterprises level resources yet. So, costume designer Jacqueline Duran, working alongside Glenn Dillon and Dave Crossman, built a suit that genuinely looks homemade. The cowl is leather, stitched rather than molded, with visible scuffs and gashes worked right into the material like Bruce has been getting hit night after night and just keeps patching it up. The cape is noticeably shorter than any previous version, more of a functional wingsuit than a dramatic sweep of fabric, and Robert Pattinson himself was reportedly involved in shaping how it moved, so he could actually fight in it. Reeves has said the whole design is meant to feel unfinished, like Bruce is still figuring out who this person even is. That's honestly what makes this suit stand out on a list this long. Every other entry represents a Batman who has more or less arrived. This one is deliberately still becoming. Batman Beyond suit, Terry McGinnis. Not many superhero suits are strong enough to carry an entire spin-off show on their own, but this one basically did. When Batman Beyond premiered in January 1992, courtesy of Bruce Timm, Paul Dini, and Alan Burnett, it jumped the whole franchise decades into the future, and handed the cowl to a teenager named Terry McGinnis after an aging Bruce Wayne could no longer keep up physically. Here's the twist though. Bruce didn't design this suit for Terry at all. He built it years earlier for himself as a way to keep fighting crime once his own body started failing him, and Terry just happened to be the one who eventually inherited it. Visually, it ditched almost everything associated with the character up to that point. No yellow oval, no scalloped cape, just a sleek black bodysuit with a sharp red bat symbol across the chest, looking more like a cyberpunk stealth suit than anything from Gotham's past. And functionally, this thing is less of a costume and more of a full exoskeleton. It amplifies the wearer's strength by a factor of 10, has retractable wings under the arms for gliding, rocket boosters in the boots for actual powered flight, and a cloaking device that can turn Terry almost completely invisible, with ultraviolet light being basically its only weakness. Add electromagnetic boot pads for wall climbing and retractable claws, and you've got a suit doing more heavy lifting than practically anything else on this list. It's honestly wild that a show built around a legacy character managed to create a Batsuit iconic enough that fans still argue whether Terry could take on Bruce's classic version in a straight fight. Batman v Superman Justice League Armored Suit. Here's a fun twist most people don't know about this one. Everyone assumes Bruce built this hulking exoskeleton specifically to fight Superman, but according to Zack Snyder himself, that's not actually the original intent behind it in the story. The suit was meant for other, more grounded threats, and Bruce just happened to already have it sitting around when things escalated with Clark. Costume designer Michael Wilkinson leaned heavily into Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns for the visual language here, and he specifically wanted it to look homemade in a raw, industrial way, like something Bruce welded together in his own workshop, rather than something Wayne Enterprises manufactured. That's why it reads so much bulkier and rougher than any previous movie suit. No sleek tailoring, just riveted plates and exposed joints. Underneath all that, it's a powered exoskeleton built from a Kevlar titanium weave, strong enough to shrug off gunfire and knife strikes, with glowing blue eyes on the cowl that make it look almost mechanical rather than human. And when the actual fight against Superman does happen, this suit comes loaded for it anyway. A riot gun that fires kryptonite gas grenades and a kryptonite-tipped spear, both necessary since without them Bruce genuinely stands no chance against a Kryptonian. It's a suit built around a very Batman kind of logic, not raw power for its own sake, just enough preparation to level a fight that shouldn't be fair. Love it or hate it, and plenty of fans landed on both sides after this movie came out, there's no denying it's one of the more distinct visual takes on Batman ever put on screen. Injustice, Gods Among Us suit. To get why this suit looks the way it does, you kind of need the backstory first. Injustice, Gods Among Us imagines a Gotham and Metropolis where the Joker tricks Superman into killing Lois Lane and detonating a nuke that wipes out Metropolis entirely. Clark, understandably shattered, stops being a symbol of hope and becomes something closer to a dictator, forming what the game calls the regime. Batman refuses to go along with it and instead builds an underground resistance movement called the Insurgency to fight his former friend directly. So this suit isn't really designed to fight street-level criminals anymore. It's built for guerrilla warfare against actual superhumans. Visually, it leans dark and military, way more segmented armor plating than any classic comic costume. Triple weave Kevlar inlays mixed with carbon nanotube fibers, and honestly it reads closer to tactical gear than a superhero outfit. There's no bright yellow oval here, nothing about it wants to be seen or recognized. Everything is muted and battle-worn, which makes total sense for a Batman who's been fighting a losing war for years by the time you see him in-game. What's interesting is how this suit became shorthand across fandom for the entire concept of evil timeline Batman. It shows up referenced constantly whenever people discuss alternate universe Batman takes, way beyond just this one game. It's proof that a costume doesn't need flashy gimmicks to become iconic. Sometimes just nailing the emotional tone of a story is enough to make people remember it years later.
Though I have to admit she came a lot closer than you ever did.
The new Batman Adventures streamlined suit. So this redesign actually comes down to a pretty practical production decision. When Batman the Animated Series wrapped and Bruce Timm moved into making Superman the Animated Series, he noticed the simpler character designs on that show were producing way more consistent animation. Naturally, when the Batman side of the DCAU came back in 1997 as the new Batman Adventures, Timm wanted that same streamlined efficiency applied to Batman himself. The most noticeable change is that the yellow oval around the bat symbol is completely gone, leaving just a plain black bat stamped on a darker, grayer suit, an aesthetic clearly borrowed from Frank Miller and David Mazzucchelli's Batman Year One. The blue highlighting that used to catch the light on his cape and cowl in the original series also disappeared entirely, replaced with straight black. Even the utility belt got simplified, swapping the yellow capsule pouches for plain light brown one. And it's not just the suit. Bruce Wayne's whole civilian wardrobe shifted from brown suits to all black, and Kevin Conroy actually adjusted his voice performance to sound colder and more clipped to match. None of these changes were purely cosmetic though. They line up with a Batman who's meant to feel harder and more worn down than the one audiences met back in 1992. It's a redesign that a lot of animation fans still argue about. Some think it stripped away personality for the sake of efficiency. Others think it's the show finally catching up to how grim the character always should have looked. Hellbat armor. This one starts with genuine heartbreak. Damian Wayne, Bruce's own son and the Robin at the time, gets killed, and his body ends up taken to Apocalypse by Darkseid's forces. Bruce wants to go get him back. The Justice League tells him absolutely not, that's suicide, and Bruce goes anyway. To even have a shot at surviving Apocalypse, he needed something way beyond his usual gear. So the entire League actually pitched in to build this thing with him. Superman forged the core metal at the center of the sun. Wonder Woman blessed it for durability, Green Lantern layered in his constructs, Flash worked speed-enhancing elements into it, and Cyborg handled the tech side. What came out the other end is this sleek black and red armor equipped with a genuine AI system, capable of flight, cloaking, and firing actual energy blasts straight from the chest. Wearing it, Batman goes toe-to-toe with Granny Goodness, Caliban, and eventually Darkseid himself. Something that would be flat-out impossible in his normal gear. But here's the catch that makes this suit so interesting beyond the raw power fantasy of it all. The Hellbat doesn't run on batteries or Wayne Enterprises tech. It runs on Bruce's own metabolism. The longer he stays in it, the more it's literally eating away at his body to keep functioning. So this isn't really a suit about Batman becoming a god for a day. It's about how far he's willing to burn himself down for someone he loves, which honestly makes it hit different from every other high-tech suit on this list. Justice League Unlimited suit. By 2001, Batman wasn't just headlining his own show anymore. He was sharing screen time with Superman, Wonder Woman, Flash, Green Lantern, Hawkgirl, and Martian Manhunter in Justice League, and his suit needed to hold its own visually next to characters with way brighter, bolder color schemes. So the DCAU team landed on something that's essentially a greatest hits mashup of everything that came before. The base shape and simplicity comes straight from the new Batman adventures, but the blue highlighting on the cape and cowl makes a comeback from the original Batman the Animated Series, though it's toned down into more of a muted purplish blue rather than that earlier electric blue. On top of that, the cowl's ears got noticeably longer and the boots picked up small heels, both details that were quietly setting up the Batman Beyond look that was technically already airing by this point in the DCAU timeline. It's a slightly slimmer, more athletic redesign overall too, which made sense once he needed to physically hold his own in wide shots next to Superman and Wonder Woman without looking undersized. This version stuck around for years, carrying through Justice League into Justice League Unlimited all the way to 2006, making it one of the longest-running suits in the entire DC animated universe. If Batman the Animated Series gave us the definitive solo Batman, this is really the definitive team player version, built specifically to share a frame with gods and aliens and still look like he belongs there. Batman Forever, Batman and Robin suit. Okay, let's just get this out of the way immediately. Yes, we're talking about the nipples. Val Kilmer's suit for 1995's Batman Forever swapped out Tim Burton's more brooding aesthetic for something Joel Schumacher wanted, lighter and sexier. And the costume team, led by Rob Ringwood, again with sculptor Jose Fernandez doing the actual molding, decided to go fully anatomical. Fernandez has said in interviews that the inspiration came from Roman centurion armor and classic Greek statues, not some kind of fetish angle like people assumed at the time. He figured if you're sculpting a muscular body, it would look weird to skip the nipples entirely. Ringwood himself apparently called it the Panther suit internally, going for something sleeker and more predatory looking than Keaton's bulkier armor. Reasonable explanation aside, audiences noticed immediately, and when George Clooney stepped into the role for 1997's Batman and Robin, Schumacher actually asked Fernandez to make them even more pronounced for that scene. That decision alone became the single most talked about detail of both movies, overshadowing genuinely interesting stuff like the suit's built-in laser cutter and buzzsaw gadgets. Even Bob Kane, the character's co-creator, reportedly objected to the design at the time. Decades later, people still bring it up constantly. Tim Burton gets asked about it in interviews despite having nothing to do with either film, and Clooney's actual suit sold at auction for tens of thousands of dollars, specifically because of its infamy. It's proof that sometimes the thing a costume gets remembered for has nothing to do with its actual practical function. Batman of Zurr-En-Arrh. This is one of those suits that barely gets any screen time, but ends up living rent-free in every hardcore fan's head anyway. It actually goes all the way back to 1958's Batman number 113, a delightfully weird Silver Age story where Batman gets teleported to a planet called Zurr-En-Arrh and meets an alien named Tlano, who basically cosplayed as Batman after being inspired by Earth's version. Purple cape, red bodysuit, yellow accents, the whole thing. For decades, that was it, a one-off oddity. Then in 2008, Grant Morrison, during the Batman R.I.P. storyline, completely recontextualized it. Turns out Bruce was so paranoid about the possibility of being mentally compromised that he built himself a literal backup personality as insurance, one triggered by the phrase Zurr-En-Arrh, which is revealed to be a garbled memory of his father's actual last words in Crime Alley, something about how they'd probably lock up someone like Zorro in Arkham. When that trigger activates, Bruce essentially stops being Bruce. He becomes this stripped-down, more violent, less restrained version of Batman, and true to the alien Tlano's aesthetic, he throws together this scavenged purple, red, and yellow costume out of whatever's lying around. sometimes wielding nothing more than a baseball bat. It's such a bizarre concept on paper that it easily could have been a one-time gimmick, but it clearly struck a nerve with readers because it kept coming back, most recently tied directly into the failsafe storyline from Chip Zdarsky's run. Not bad for a suit that started as a random alien costume from a story Batman himself wasn't even sure he didn't just dream up. The Batman Who Laughs armor. Out of every villain that came stumbling out of the multiverse during Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's Dark Knight's Metal event, this is the one that absolutely refused to stay contained to one crossover. The concept alone is nightmare fuel. This is a version of Bruce Wayne who finally kills the Joker, only to discover too late that the Joker had one final contingency built in, a toxin designed specifically to slowly rewrite the killer's moral code into something closer to his own. Bruce doesn't turn into the Joker exactly, he becomes something worse. All of Batman's genius and preparation now running on Joker logic. Once he realizes what's happening to him, he calls his entire Bat family together to the cave, and instead of asking them to stop him like they assume, he guns every one of them down so none of them can warn anyone else. Visually, Capullo leaned hard into the Metal event's heavy metal aesthetic, first painting the classic Batsuit in Joker's purple and green, then eventually shifting into this all-black, spiked, leather-clad armor that reads like a demonic executioner more than a superhero costume. He surrounds himself with what fans call the Rabid Robins, Jokerized kids he's basically adopted as pets. This character was clearly meant as a one-arc nightmare, but he hit so hard with readers that Snyder spun him off into his own miniseries almost immediately, and he's remained one of DC's most reliably terrifying recurring villains ever since. The Flashpoint Thomas Wayne Batsuit. This one hits different because of what didn't happen rather than what did. In the 2011 Flashpoint event by Jeff Johns and Andy Kubert, the timeline gets rewritten so that Joe Chill kills young Bruce Wayne in Crime Alley instead of his parents. Thomas and Martha survive, but obviously that's not exactly a happy ending either. Thomas spirals and eventually straps on a batsuit himself to hunt down criminals with a brutality his son never would have allowed, guns included, something the real Batman refuses to touch. But the gut punch is what happens to Martha. Unable to process losing her only child, she completely breaks, and in one of DC's darker twists, she becomes this timeline's Joker, carving a smile into her own face and going on to torment her husband directly. So visually, Thomas's batsuit borrows the classic silhouette everyone recognizes: cape, cowl, bat symbol, but roughs it up with tactical shoulder pads, visible gun holsters strapped to his legs, and glowing red-eye lenses on the cowl that make him look permanently furious rather than just intimidating. There's also a red circle behind the bat emblem instead of the usual black on gray, a small detail that reads as a warning sign the moment you see it. What makes this suit stick with people isn't really the design elements individually, it's what the whole costume represents. A mirror version of Batman built entirely out of grief and vengeance instead of discipline, which honestly makes for one of the more emotionally loaded alternate universe takes DC has ever put out. Arkham Knight suit. By the time Rocksteady got to wrapping up their Arkham trilogy in 2015, they clearly decided the final Batsuit needed to look like Batman was gearing up for an actual war, not just another night of chasing thugs around rooftops. And honestly, given the plot, that tracks. This is the game where Scarecrow floods Gotham with fear toxin, and a militarized enemy calling himself the Arkham Knight rolls tanks through the streets. So the suit, internally referred to in game lore as version 8.03 or 8.04, depending on the upgrade path, is easily the most armored, most mechanically dense design in the whole series. It's got individually animated overlapping plates all across the torso and limbs, a holographic projector built into the chest, and gauntlets wired with haptic controls that let Bruce remotely pilot the Batmobile without even touching a controller for it in-universe. There's retractable blades in the forearms too, feeding directly into detective mode for analyzing samples on the fly. Here's the detail that actually made this suit stand out from every previous Arkham costume though. It visibly degrades as the story goes on, picking up scorch marks, torn fabric, and dents that persist through cutscenes and gameplay alike. So by the endgame, Bruce genuinely looks like he's been through hell. Not everyone loved the design though. Some critics felt like all those individually moving plates ended up reading as visually busy or cluttered compared to the cleaner silhouettes of Arkham Asylum's original suit. Still, as a pure escalation story told purely through costume design, it's hard to top. White Knight suit. Before we even get to what this suit looks like, you need to understand just how upside down Sean Murphy flipped the whole mythology to justify it. Batman White Knight, released across 2017 and 2018, starts with a genuinely wild premise. Batman accidentally forces the Joker to swallow an experimental pill mid-chase, and it actually cures him. Jack Napier, lucid and sane for the first time in years, decides the real villain of Gotham has been Batman all along, a reckless vigilante who's caused decades of collateral damage while the GCPD looked the other way. So Napier runs for public office to dismantle Batman's operation legally, which suddenly puts Bruce on the defensive in a way gadgets alone can't fix. Visually, Murphy leans into his now signature palette, mostly black, white, and gray, with yellow reserved specifically for things that matter narratively. And the Batsuit is one of those things. It comes out sleeker and more angular than most modern comic suits, all sharp geometric lines befitting Murphy's own distinctive art style without piling on unnecessary gadgets or bulk. It reads like a suit built by someone under actual political and reputational pressure, rather than someone with unlimited Wayne Enterprises funding to burn. The story struck such a nerve that DC officially folded it into the multiverse as its own canon pocket, nicknamed the Murphyverse, and it sold well over 500,000 copies worldwide, spanning 2 direct sequels. For a suit born out of a genuinely radical what-if, being taken seriously enough to get its own corner of DC continuity says a lot about how well this redesign landed with readers. Batman Ninja Armor. Picture this pitch meeting. Batman gets flung back in time to feudal Japan along with basically his entire rogues gallery. And once he lands, none of his gadgets work properly anymore. That's genuinely the premise of 2018's Batman Ninja, courtesy of director Junpei Mizusaki and character designer Takashi Okazaki, the same artist behind Afro Samurai. Gorilla Grodd's time displacement machine misfires during a jailbreak at Arkham, yanking Batman, Catwoman, and most of the Bat family hundreds of years into the past, where the villains have each become feudal lords ruling over warring territories, Joker naturally installing himself as the most powerful daimyo of them all. Stripped of his usual tech within minutes, Batman has to lean on Alfred, reimagined here as a ninja, and rebuild himself from the ground up using the era's own tools. The resulting armor is a genuine fusion built from traditional lamellar plating and Kabuto-style helmet shapes you'd recognize from real samurai gear, but folded around Batman's bat motif, so the ears and cape read as part of the armor's silhouette, rather than something bolted onto a modern suit. It's a wildly different visual language from basically anything else on this list, closer to classic Japanese woodblock art brought into motion than Western comic book design. Critics were split on how the plot itself held together. Some felt it leaned too hard into spectacle over story, but almost everyone agreed the visuals were something genuinely new for the character. That reception was strong enough that Warner Bros. Japan eventually greenlit a full sequel, proving this one-off experiment had real staying power. The Thrasher suit. This suit exists because Batman found a genuinely brilliant weakness and needed a way to actually exploit it. During 2012's Night of the Owls, the first major crossover of DC's New 52 era written by Scott Snyder, Batman digs up the body of a Talon named William Cobb to study how the Court of Owls assassins keep coming back from the dead. What he discovers is that the electrum implants keeping Talons alive and regenerating also make them dangerously vulnerable to extreme cold. That knowledge becomes critical fast because the court sends a whole squad of Talons straight into the Batcave to finish Bruce off. Rather than fight on their terms, Batman drops the entire cave's temperature down to Arctic levels and suits up in what fans now call the Thrasher armor, a bulky exosuit built from meta-aramid mesh fibers, a material stronger than Kevlar, designed to withstand both intense heat and brutal cold while carrying weeks' worth of oxygen. It's noticeably bulkier and more tank-like than his usual gear, prioritizing raw survivability over the sleek agility his other suits go for. What makes this one stand out on a list this long is how narrow its purpose actually is. Batman built this thing for one specific fight against one specific type of enemy, and as far as mainline continuity goes, he never really needs to put it on again afterward. That specificity is exactly why collectors love it. DC Collectibles even turned it into a Greg Capullo designer series figure, immortalizing a suit that technically only mattered for a single issue. Batman Caped Crusader 2024 suit. This one's got a rough road just getting to screens, which honestly makes its final look even more interesting. Batman Caped Crusader was originally announced back in 2021 for HBO Max with an absolutely stacked creative team. Bruce Timm of Batman the Animated Series fame, J.J. Abrams, and the Batman director Matt Reeves all attached as executive producers. Then Warner Bros. Discovery's whole streaming shakeup happened, the show got shelved, and it eventually landed at Amazon Prime Video instead, finally premiering in August 2024. Set in a 1940s film noir version of Gotham, the show gave Tim a chance to design Batman almost from scratch, rather than just tweaking his earlier work. And here's the fun part. Instead of building on the sleeker, dark deco look he created for BTAS decades ago, Tim went backward, deliberately pulling from Bob Kane's earliest Detective Comics art. That means noticeably bigger, more elongated ears jutting out to the sides, sharper and more angular cape shapes, and a rougher, more period-appropriate silhouette overall. Hamish Linklater voices this version of Batman, and the whole show leans harder into slow-burn detective procedural storytelling than flashy set-piece action, which this sturdier, less acrobatic redesign fits well. It's a redesign that essentially closes the loop on this entire list, reaching all the way back to suit number 1 for inspiration while still filtering it through decades of noir influenced Batman storytelling. Season 2 premiered in July 2026, so this take on the character is still very much active as we're recording this, which makes it a genuinely current entry rather than something we're looking back on with hindsight. The Insider Suit. Quick question, how do you come back from the dead with actually announcing you're alive? That's the exact problem Bruce Wayne has to solve after Final Crisis, the massive 2008 Grant Morrison crossover where Batman finally breaks his no-guns rule to shoot Darkseid with a god-killing bullet, only for Darkseid's retaliating Omega beams to seemingly end him for good. Turns out he wasn't actually killed though, he got hurled backward through time instead, and by the time he claws his way back to the present, Dick Grayson has already stepped into the cowl with Bruce's own son Damian as his Robin. Rather than barge back in and upend everything they've built, Bruce makes a quieter choice. He builds an entirely new identity called the Insider to move through Gotham unnoticed and figure out what's actually changed. The suit itself masks his face and voice completely, nothing like the traditional cape and cowl silhouette, and functionally it's almost like a stripped down Justice League in one costume, cycling through modes that mimic his teammates' powers, night vision, and sound dampening for stealth, a burst of Speed Force inspired acceleration, even limited access to abilities resembling heat vision or invisibility. The catch is it can only run one of these modes at a time and needs real recharge time between uses. So it's powerful but never overwhelming. It's such a clever, quietly weird corner of Batman lore that a lot of casual fans have genuinely never heard of, which honestly makes it one of the most fun deep cuts on this entire list. The Justice Buster. Here's a genuinely unsettling thought for a Batman video. What exactly does Bruce Wayne keep in reserve in case his own teammates ever turn on him? Turns out quite a lot, and this suit is the proof. During Scott Snyder and Greg Capullo's 2015 storyline Endgame, the Joker returns with a modified strain of his toxin capable of infecting the entire Justice League, twisting Wonder Woman, Flash, Aquaman, and eventually Superman into attacking Batman directly. Rather than panic, Bruce calmly activates something he calls the Fenrir Protocol, and out comes this massive warsuit fans nicknamed the Justice Buster, built years in advance specifically to fight his own friends if it ever came to this. Every tool on it is tailored to a specific teammate, a magical relic that tricks Wonder Woman into thinking she's already killed him, a frictionless coating to send Flash crashing, a moisture-absorbing polymer to immobilize Aquaman. Then Superman shows up and things get genuinely brutal. The suit gets torn apart, an entire building collapses on top of Bruce, and he only survives by spitting kryptonite-laced dust straight into Clark's face at the last second. Reaction to this one is honestly pretty split among longtime readers. Some find it a thrilling, over-the-top spectacle, showing exactly how far Batman's paranoia can go. Others think it's a less clever rehash of the far more grounded Tower of Babel storyline from years earlier, where similar contingency plans were used more cleverly and with real consequences. Either way, as a pure visual concept, a single Batsuit built to fight literal gods one at a time, there's really nothing else on this list quite like it. Nightfall Nightquest Transitional Gauntlets. We already covered the finished Azrael Batsuit earlier on this list. But honestly, the messier in-between version deserves its own mention too, mostly for the completists watching who care about exactly how that transformation happened. When Jean-Paul Vallée first took over as Batman, he actually kept wearing Bruce's classic suit completely unmodified. It's only gradually, issue by issue through the Night Quest storyline, that Jean-Paul starts bolting new hardware onto it piece by piece, rather than redesigning everything all at once. First, it's just razor-clawed gauntlets and a more powerful grappling hook swapped in for the standard gloves. Then a shuriken launcher gets added, firing bat-shaped blades from a hidden magazine. After that comes a searchlight mounted directly into the chest emblem, replacing the classic bat symbol entirely, followed by a reinforced helmet fitted with laser sights. The cape gets reworked into more of a rigid glider structure around this point too, and eventually a flamethrower module gets bolted onto the gauntlets as the finishing touch. So visually, this is Batman's classic silhouette being slowly cannibalized in real time, panel by panel, until barely anything of the original suit is left standing. It's a genuinely fun detail for anyone reading the whole saga in order, watching one piece of gear at a time replace the Batman most readers grew up with. Oh, and here's a fun bit of trivia. Those exact clawed gauntlets eventually turn up decades later in the hands of Kate Spencer, the modern-day Manhunter, who pulls them straight out of an LAPD evidence locker to build her own vigilante identity. Batman, the Telltale series suit. This one is a slightly unusual entry because the suit itself is less a single fixed design and more a reflection of choices you make as the player. Released by Telltale Games in 2016 with Troy Baker voicing Bruce Wayne, Batman the Telltale series starts Batman out in a relatively basic prototype suit, cloth-based rather than heavily armored, closer in spirit to a Year One style look than anything high-tech. As the story escalates, the game hands you upgraded versions, a Mark I suit with proper armor plating and shorter ears borrowing from The Dark Knight Returns, a Mark II clearly modeled on the heavy silver exoframe armor from that same comic, and a Mark III that leans into the plated gauntlet blade aesthetic of Nolan's trilogy. And depending on choices you make deep into the story, you can even end up in an entirely different cloth-based suit for the finale, one that critics have pointed out looks strikingly similar to Ben Affleck's shorter-eared Batsuit from the DC Extended Universe. None of these individual looks are especially groundbreaking on their own, which is honestly why this entry earns its spot as more narratively interesting than visually iconic. But here's the detail that actually matters. Several critics and even Matt Reeves' own team have pointed to this game alongside Arkham Origins as a genuine visual reference point for Robert Pattinson's suit in The Batman, right down to the smaller, more subdued chest emblem. Not bad for a suit most casual fans have probably never given a second thought to. The yellow oval utility belt era suit. Okay, full disclosure, we already talked about the yellow oval's origin story earlier on this list, so let's actually use this entry to talk about what happened after Carmine Infantino and Julius Schwartz introduced it back in 1964. Because here's the thing, this exact silhouette, blue cowl and cape, gray body, yellow oval around the bat symbol, utility belt lined with those familiar rounded patches, basically just stayed put for close to 3 decades. No dramatic redesign moment, no single artist run people point to as the turning point. It just kept being Batman through the 60s Adam West era, through the entire Bronze Age and well into the 80s without anyone feeling a pressing need to change it. And that's honestly the whole point of including it separately here, because this suit never had one big dramatic debut issue or a movie moment attached to it. It's genuinely difficult to single out any one specific version as the definitive yellow oval suit. They all just blend together into one long stable era. That stability is exactly why it became the default Batman used absolutely everywhere, outside actual continuity, coloring books, lunchboxes, international toy lines, stage show costumes, generic merchandise you'd find at a random gas station. If you asked someone with zero comic knowledge to draw Batman from memory even today, there's a solid chance they'd land somewhere close to this look, purely because it was the visual wallpaper of the character for so long. Sometimes the least visually distinct suit on a list is exactly the one that did the most quiet, unglamorous work. Batman Arkham Asylum Arkham City Suit. Alright, this is the one I'm picking to close out the list, and if you remember all the way back to the start of this video, you'll notice this suit was actually the one I teased before we even got into suit number 1. That's because I genuinely think that it deserves to end things on a high note everyone will recognize. When Rocksteady Studios built Batman Arkham Asylum back in 2009, art director David Hago and his team leaned heavily on Jim Lee's artwork from the Hush storyline as their main reference point, wanting a Batman who looked chiseled and combat-ready rather than lean and acrobatic. But the actual genius of this suit is how it plays with first impressions. At a glance, it just looks like a simple dark gray and black bodysuit, barely more detailed than something you'd see in an average comic panel. Look closer though, and you start noticing the rivets fusing separate armor plates together, the realistic fabric texture work, the deliberately military-inspired detailing hiding in plain sight under all that spandex-looking simplicity. Add in the built-in detective vision baked directly into the cowl lenses and a communicator tucked into the ear for talking to Oracle, and you've got a suit that feels genuinely lived in and functional rather than just another flashy costume. When Arkham City expanded the world 5 times over in 2011, the suit barely needed to change, because the foundation was already that strong. This is widely considered one of the most influential redesigns in the character's entire history, shaping how basically every Batman game and even some live-action productions have approached the character ever since. And honestly, it's hard to think of a suit more universally beloved to end a list like this one on. And that's my rundown, 30 Batman suits that I think genuinely earned their spot in the spotlight, from scrappy Year 1 prototypes all the way to apocalyptic god-killer armor, and everything in between. Every single one of them tells me something different about who Bruce is in that moment. Paranoid planner, broken father, futuristic legend. Honestly, that's why I don't think this character ever runs out of fresh takes. Now, I want to hear from you. Which suit is your all-time favorite, and which one do you think I massively overrated or completely slept on? Drop your top 3 in the comments, tell me what era you grew up with, and let me know what Batman topic you want me to tackle next. Hit like if you enjoyed this one with me, subscribe if you want more of these breakdowns, and ring the bell so you don't miss what I've got coming next. We'll see you in the next one!